What happens when a flight attendant tells an old black man, "If you can't keep up, maybe you shouldn't be flying"? And what if he owns the airline? Would you speak up or stay silent like everyone else did? This isn't just a flight. It's a lesson in dignity, power, and quiet justice. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories. The jet bridge was crowded and restless that afternoon, filled with the impatient shuffle of travelers eager to board. The buzz of rolling luggage and muttered complaints echoed off the walls. Among them, an elderly black man moved quietly, a worn leather briefcase tucked under his arm. His name was Jeremiah Collins, and every step he took was slow, careful, not because of frailty, but because life had taught him never to rush into spaces that weren't made for him. His coat was clean but old, sleeves slightly frayed. His shoes were polished but creased with time. He didn't meet many eyes as he moved through the line. He was used to being invisible. A few steps ahead, a small girl dropped her stuffed bunny, and in the chaos of rolling suitcases, no one noticed. No one except Jeremiah. He bent down with gentle effort, picked up the toy, and tapped her shoulder with a kind smile. "You dropped this, sweetheart." Before the little girl could even whisper thank you, a sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. "Sir." All heads turned. Vanessa, the lead flight attendant, white, early 30s, hair pulled tight into a severe bun, stood near the aircraft door, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "If you can't keep up, maybe you shouldn't be flying," she snapped, loud enough for everyone to hear. Jeremiah looked up, startled but not shaken. He straightened slowly, handed the bunny to the girl, and turned to face the line again without a word. The air shifted. For a moment, everything stilled. Passengers behind him avoided eye contact. A businessman pulled out his phone. A mother gripped her child's hand tighter, but no one said anything. Not one person spoke up. Vanessa didn't even look twice as she turned back into the cabin, her heels clicking coldly against the floor. Jeremiah stood still for just a second longer. Then, with the weight of silence around him, he stepped onto the plane, not with anger, not with fear, just the kind of quiet that says, "I've seen worse. I've survived worse. And I'm still here." And somewhere deep inside that silence, the real turbulence had already begun. Jeremiah moved down the narrow aisle with the quiet grace of someone who had lived through many seasons of life. His shoulders were slightly hunched, not from weakness, but from the weight of years. He walked slowly, steadying himself with one hand against the seat backs as passengers rushed past, brushing by without so much as a glance. His coat, once a rich chestnut brown, had faded at the seams. The buttons on his shirt were fastened all the way to the collar, a small sign of discipline and dignity. His slacks were neatly pressed, though the fabric was worn thin at the knees. And the old leather briefcase, its corners scuffed, handle soft from decades of use, never left his grip. He paused at row 18, double-checked the seat number on his boarding pass, and turned to place his briefcase in the overhead bin. His arms raised slowly, a faint tremble in his fingers as he tried to lift the bag over his head. It wasn't heavy, but time had a way of making things feel heavier than they used to. Before he could adjust his grip, a hand reached out and yanked the briefcase from him. Vanessa. She didn't make eye contact, just shoved the bag into the compartment with one hard motion and slammed the bin shut. "You should have checked this," she muttered under her breath. Jeremiah blinked. There was no thank you, no softness, just a cold, mechanical dismissal. He gave a small nod, not of agreement, but of understanding, and lowered himself into his seat by the window. Outside, the last rays of sun stretched across the tarmac, casting long shadows over the wings of the plane. Jeremiah folded his hands in his lap, his posture still, his breath even. He didn't say a word, didn't complain, didn't frown, but his eyes told a story, one of patience, one of long memory, one of a man who had been underestimated before and had learned exactly when to speak and when to wait. As the plane continued boarding, Jeremiah kept his gaze fixed on the clouds rolling in over the tarmac. But his mind had drifted far from the airport, back to a dirt road in rural Alabama, summer of 1955. He was 10. The bus had pulled up late that day, its windows streaked with dust. Jeremiah stood beside his mother, her hand wrapped firmly around his. He remembered how tightly she held him, not out of fear, but protection. They climbed aboard, and the driver didn't even look at them when he barked, "Back of the bus," or "Don't ride at all." The seats up front were half empty. Jeremiah didn't understand why they had to stand when there was space. "But Mama, theirs," he had whispered. His mother, always graceful, pressed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Shh, baby, we'll stand." And so they did. Jeremiah had clung to the pole, his small fingers wrapped around the cold metal as the bus rattled down the road. He stared at the white passengers seated in front, legs crossed, arms resting comfortably. No one looked back at them. No one cared. His mother had leaned down and whispered something he never forgot. "You don't have to shout to prove you matter." Those words settled into him like roots. She wasn't saying to stay silent forever. She was saying, know who you are. Let them reveal who they are. Then you act. Years later, through the boardrooms, the closed doors, the sideways glances, Jeremiah kept that truth tucked away. And now, here he was, on another ride. Different decade, different uniform, same lesson. He wasn't standing anymore. He had earned the right to sit. Not just here, but in places most people like Vanessa would never imagine. The overhead bin rattled as another passenger forced their luggage into place. Jeremiah didn't flinch. The memory didn't make him angry, it made him grounded. And it reminded him some lessons never stop being useful. The scent of warm food drifted down the cabin, roasted chicken, vegetables, the soft clink of cutlery wrapped in plastic. Passengers perked up, unfolding tray tables, adjusting their seats. It was time for meal service. Jeremiah stayed still, hands folded, eyes half closed. He hadn't eaten all day. He never expected much from airline meals, but something warm would have been nice. Vanessa pushed the cart down the aisle, her posture crisp, her eyes sharp as ever. She handed out trays with practiced efficiency, nodding politely at passengers in row 16, row 17. Then she stopped at row 18. Her smile faded the moment she saw him. "Name?" she asked flatly, glancing at the list clipped to the cart. Jeremiah sat up slightly. "Jeremiah Collins." She scanned, clicked her pen, then let out an annoyed sigh. "You didn't pre-select a meal," she said, already turning away. "We only brought enough for those who did." "I believe I chose one when I booked," Jeremiah replied, voice calm. "Well, it's not on my list," Vanessa snapped, clearly uninterested in checking further. "We don't have extras." A pause. Then another voice, "Actually, we do." Leo, the junior flight attendant, mid-20s, Filipino-American, gentle eyes, stepped up from the galley. He held a wrapped tray in both hands. "There's a vegetarian left," he said. No one in the front claimed it. He leaned in toward Jeremiah. "It's not much, sir, but—" Vanessa snatched the tray out of Leo's hands. Her voice dropped, cold and firm. "He's not special. This isn't charity. If we make exceptions for one person, we have to do it for everyone." A beat of silence followed. Daniel, the businessman across the aisle, looked up from his tablet, his brow furrowed. Vanessa shoved the tray back into the cart and pushed it forward without another word. Jeremiah didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply turned to her, his expression unreadable, his tone calm. "Thank you for making that clear," he said. Something about the way he said it, without venom, without sarcasm, made a few passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Vanessa didn't respond. Leo stood frozen for a moment, then looked down at his hands as if he'd dropped something far more important than a meal. Jeremiah leaned back in his seat and stared out the window. He wasn't hungry anymore, not for food. For justice, yes, but he could wait. The cart rolled farther down the aisle, its wheels clicking softly as Vanessa moved on without looking back. The murmur of utensils unwrapping and drinks being poured filled the cabin once again. But at row 18, there was only stillness. Jeremiah remained seated, his hands resting gently on his lap, his eyes half-lidded as he stared out into the clouds. If anyone had been watching closely, they might have seen the faintest motion, the subtle tapping of 2 fingers against the worn surface of his leather briefcase. A rhythm, not of nerves, of calculation. Across the aisle, Daniel leaned in slightly, voice low but steady. "You carry yourself like someone who's seen boardrooms," he said. Jeremiah glanced at him for the first time, his expression unreadable. Daniel gave a faint smile. "Let me guess. You used to run something, still do." Jeremiah didn't reply. He didn't need to. Instead, with deliberate motion, he reached into the side pocket of his briefcase and pulled out his phone. A few taps. No rush. No drama. He opened the skyward Atlantic internal executive portal, not something an average passenger would even know existed, and navigated to the crew evaluation tab. He typed 6 words. Crew conduct report, urgent attention requested. Attached flight number. Seat, time. He hit send. No raised voice, no announcement, no confrontation, just a message, clean, direct, quiet. He returned the phone to his briefcase and folded his hands once more. Daniel watched, his brows lifting ever so slightly. Then he nodded to himself and sat back. It wasn't loud. It wasn't public. But something had shifted in the air, and somehow everyone around could feel it. The silence had changed sides. Later in the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers slipped into a quiet lull of movies and drowsy conversations, Leo made his way back to row 18. He crouched beside Jeremiah's seat, keeping his voice low, careful not to draw attention. "Sir," he began, eyes filled with something rare in the air, genuine regret, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Jeremiah turned to him slowly. He didn't look surprised, only patient. Leo continued, his voice almost a whisper. "What she said, what she did, it wasn't right. I should have said something sooner." Jeremiah regarded him for a moment, then gave a slight nod. "You tried." "But not enough," Leo said quickly. I didn't want to lose my job." Jeremiah smiled gently. "I understand. When I was younger, I made the same mistake." Leo blinked. "You did." Jeremiah shifted in his seat, settling into a memory. "I was about your age. Worked at a small bank in Georgia, first job where I wore a tie." He chuckled softly. "There was a woman, a secretary, who got yelled at by a manager right in front of me. Loud, public, embarrassing." His eyes darkened a little. "I saw it, heard it, and I did nothing." Leo looked down. Jeremiah continued, "A week later, my boss, a tall white man named Mr. Eldridge, called me into his office. He didn't scold me, didn't shame me." He smiled faintly. "He just said, Collins, if you ever want people to believe you deserve authority, you have to start using your voice when it costs you something." A pause. Jeremiah looked directly at Leo. "We're all someone's lesson at some point. The question is, do we learn?" Leo nodded slowly, visibly moved. "I'll remember that, sir." From across the aisle, Daniel, who had been pretending to scroll his phone, turned his head slightly. He'd heard every word. He didn't interrupt. He just watched the older man with a quiet kind of respect that went deeper than words. Jeremiah turned back to the window, his reflection blending with the night sky outside. He wasn't trying to make a statement. He wasn't trying to teach. But in that still moment, between 2 rows of economy seats, a man became a mirror, and others started seeing themselves more clearly. The hum of the aircraft was steady, but the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. Passengers who once stared at their screens now exchanged glances, whispering in low tones. Word had begun to spread, not with volume but with certainty. Something was happening. Then it happened. The cockpit door clicked open. The cabin grew quiet. The captain stepped out, a tall man in a navy uniform with silver wings gleaming on his chest. He rarely left the flight deck mid-air. His presence alone sent a wave of stillness rippling through the rows. He didn't stop at the galley or the first row. He walked with purpose down the aisle toward Jeremiah's seat. Vanessa, just finishing a drink refill 2 rows ahead, looked up, her body frozen. The captain stopped at row 18, adjusted his cap slightly, and addressed him directly. "Mr. Collins," he said, voice low but unmistakably clear, "we've been informed of the situation. On behalf of Skyward Atlantic Airlines, I want to personally apologize for what you've experienced on this flight." Gasps were audible. Someone dropped a phone. Several heads turned. Jeremiah looked up, his expression calm as ever. He gave a small nod. "I appreciate that, Captain," he said, "but I never asked to be treated special, only human." Vanessa's face turned pale. The color drained from her cheeks like water from a cracked glass. Her hands clenched around the edge of the service cart. Behind her, Leo stood watching, arms crossed, his gaze steady. "I warned you," he said softly. Vanessa didn't answer, couldn't. The captain inclined his head once more toward Jeremiah. "We'll be following up immediately after landing, sir." Jeremiah nodded again. "That's all I ask." The captain turned and walked back toward the cockpit. The cabin remained silent for a moment longer, as if the air itself was trying to process what had just happened. And then, row by row, expressions began to change. Passengers who had looked through Jeremiah now looked at him, not with pity, not with awe, but with something far rarer in a place like this, respect. The plane began its descent, the gentle pressure of the landing gear sending a soft ripple through the cabin. The familiar hum of the engines shifted as the wheels touched down, and the passengers instinctively adjusted in their seats, preparing for the end of their journey. But for Vanessa, the real journey was only just beginning. As the plane rolled toward the gate, she forced herself to breathe evenly, to maintain the facade of control. But her mind was racing. The words from the captain still echoed in her ears. "I apologize on behalf of Skyward Atlantic." She could feel her blood pounding in her temples, the weight of what was coming slowly sinking in. When the plane stopped, the usual post-landing shuffle began. Passengers started gathering their things, stretching their legs. But something felt different this time. Eyes were on her. Vanessa glanced across the aisle. The usual polite expressions were gone. Passengers who had once avoided her gaze now held her eyes with quiet scrutiny, some with disapproval, some with barely concealed smiles. As the last of the passengers stood up to leave, Vanessa's eyes flicked nervously toward the front of the plane. She knew what was coming, and it felt like the longest wait of her life. 2 men, dressed in dark suits, were waiting by the gate, flanked by airport security. They didn't look at the other passengers filing out. Their eyes were fixed solely on one person, Vanessa. The door opened and passengers began to leave, but Vanessa remained frozen in her seat, her hands gripping the armrest tightly. "Miss Cole," one of the executives called, his voice flat, cold. "Please remain seated." Vanessa felt the world slow around her. She swallowed hard but couldn't bring herself to stand. Her chest tightened as she watched the passengers leave, some glancing back at her, some whispering. Then Jeremiah stood up from his seat, smooth and steady. Without a word, he walked down the aisle, passing Vanessa as if she were nothing more than a shadow in his path. His calm steps were unhurried, deliberate. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. but his silence, the weight of it, was louder than any scolding could have been. It was final. Jeremiah's footsteps faded into the terminal. Vanessa remained rooted to her seat, a bitter silence settling in her stomach. It was as though the last shred of dignity she once had was slowly slipping away, and no words could ever bring it back. What did you think of this story? Was the flight attendant's fate justified, or did it go too far? We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed someone being dismissed or disrespected just because of how they looked, only to find out who they really were? Stories like Jeremiah Collins remind us power isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly and lets others reveal themselves. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories about dignity, justice, and quiet strength. Your voice matters. Let's keep the conversation going.